Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at U.S. History Standard 7, investigate the political, social, and economic developments during the age of Jackson. More specifically, we're looking at Part B of that standard, explain how the North, South, and West were linked through industrial and economic expansion, including Henry Clay and the American system. Industrialization expanded after the War of 1812 and really picked up momentum in the 1830s. The emphasis on building up American manufacturing was really a point of conflict between Henry Clay and the Whigs and the Jacksonian Democrats. The Whigs, led by Henry Clay, believed really strongly that the federal government should be involved in funding progress through infrastructure projects and investing in the development of industry. The North, South, and West were becoming increasingly linked through these advances in transportation and the industrial process. The era known as the Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in the 18th century when the purely agrarian-based economy, this farming-based economy, was replaced with the more industrial economy, commercial economy. This was when homemade goods were now being replaced with machine-made goods or factory-made goods, when human power was being replaced with factory power, when workers were beginning to go to factories to do semi-skilled or unskilled labor. The Industrial Revolution made its way to the US with Samuel Slater's water-powered textile mill in Rhode Island. However, real momentum for this shift to an industrialized economy for the US happened as the Napoleonic Wars were interfering with America's world trading market. So then America had to figure out how to improve its own national economy. As in England, the success of the Industrial Revolution in the US was brought about by four main factors. First, transportation expanded. Second, a power source was effectively used, water, and then steam power followed. Third, the industrial process was sped up. Fourth, the government passed protective tariffs to help out struggling manufacturers. Henry Clay and the Whigs supported an economic nationalism approach where the federal government would support these factors in order to achieve a nationwide economic success. So rather than these regions be acting independently from one another, this economic nationalism sought to connect America to boost the economy as a nation. The nation had abundant resources in the South. There were swift rivers in the North they could use to harness that power to operate the factories. They had a growing immigrant population for the labor in the factories, and new methods of transportation to connect the farms, factories, and markets all across the regions. Connecting the vast distances between the raw materials, the factories, and the markets was a challenge that had to be overcome if industrial and economic expansion was to happen. Private companies had been building roads since about the 1790s. However, these roads were typically toll roads, so folks had to pay a fee in order to use them, and then that money was used for the upkeep of new roads. When roads couldn't be built, barges were used, and then people and goods could use those barges only if it was flowing or going that certain way. So they were at the mercy of the direction of the barge. However, an invention, the steamboat, allowed people to go just as easily upstream and downstream as long as they bought a ticket from that private company. In the wilderness, where rivers didn't run or roads couldn't be built, Government leaders joined with business people to build canals, artificial rivers. However, these waterways weren't for steamboats, they were for barges, and they typically had mules and horses alongside them to pull the barge along. The most famous canal built during this period was the Erie Canal, which connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. It opened in 1825 after 8 years of construction. Again, the Erie Canal was used as a turnpike, so a road where roads couldn't be built. Barges carrying large cargo used the Erie Canal where roads couldn't be easily built. The canal's transportation was more efficient, so the transportation cost went down. The canal opened up western New York and even regions further west for increased settlement, and it united the Atlantic states with more regions. The impact of the Erie Canal on transportation can't be overstated. Cargo that used to cost $100 per ton and would take 2 weeks to haul on road, now on the Erie Canal cost $10 per ton. It could be moved in about 3.5 days. By the 1830s, an even faster mode of transportation was set to further expand commercial production and the economy. Railroads were less costly, time-consuming, and labor-intensive to build than canals. By 1850, there were 9,000 miles of railroad tracks crossing the United States, further cutting transportation time. The result of transportation advancements was a more interconnected nation that could more efficiently industrialize and grow a national economy. With improved transportation methods rapidly changing the U.S., Henry Clay became more involved in promoting the nation's economic growth. Clay supported industrialization and believed that the federal government should get involved to ensure the nation's economic growth. The American system was Henry Clay's plan for expanding production in the U.S. There were 3 main components to the American system. First, Clay encouraged Congress to pass protective tariffs. Now, these protective tariffs would make the imported goods, so the goods brought into the country, more expensive than the similar goods made in American factories. The second key feature of the American system was federal funding for the internal improvements to the infrastructure of the U.S. So instead of private companies or states funding roads, canals, or railroads, the federal government would fund these projects and then not be limited by state lines. The third component of the American system that Henry Clay believed was essential for the industrial and economic expansion of the country was to reestablish a national bank in order to issue a national currency and to serve as a depository for federal funds. The first bank of the U.S. was created by Alexander Hamilton during Washington's presidency. It actually expired in 1811 when the Democratic Republicans were in power. Whigs, like Henry Clay, thought it was essential to bring back a national bank in order to stabilize the economy, to fund internal improvement projects, and to invest in new industrial pursuits. Jacksonian Democrats opposed the idea of a national bank because they believed it supported the upper class industrialists and hurt the small farmer. The North, South, and West were physically linked through transportation developments in the early 1800s. They were also linked through the expansion of industrial pursuits. Most factories were located in the North, being powered by those swift-flowing rivers, and also large immigrant populations provided cheap, unskilled labor in those factories. The American South and West provided the raw materials to the factories to then manufacture finished goods. Goods were then transported by rail, road, or canal because of the widespread internal improvements to infrastructure made by the state and federal governments. Henry Clay was an important figure in the progress of American industrialization and economic nationalism.